There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Shoff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I am your host, Richard Shoff. The program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here by the grace of God. I want to talk today about illegal immigrants. Boy, there's so much we could be talking about. But you know, as far as a problem for our country, I don't think there's a greater problem we have than our illegal immigrant situation. It's not just here, it's in Europe too. The Muslims is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the Central Americans, though the Muslims can come from Central America. And the specific problem we have is mainly with Mexicans. Whereas with Europe, it's North Africans. But it's doing away with boundaries, borders, opening it up, getting rid of ISIS, sanctuary cities. And what brings it to the forelight to me today is what happened. What just happened, reported this last week out in Iowa, where Molly Tibbetts' body was found. You know, as Trump said, she's permanently separated from her family. Our president recognized the death of this Iowa college student by bashing the nation's immigration system. Of course, it was an illegal immigrant that was arrested and charged with a murder. But we need to look at the bigger problem. And this incident does put a light on that bigger problem. Trump noted that Molly Tibbetts was an incredibly young woman who's now permanently separated from her family. And the illegal from Mexico was here and killed her. Trump's mention of Tibbetts being separated from her family was a reference to the practice of separating children from their parents where families illegally enter the United States from Mexico. The practice was ended after a public outcry. The president said that's what's needed now is the border wall between U.S. and Mexico. He's been talking about it ever since his presidential run began. Been blocked, of course, to a large extent. We need the wall. We need our immigration laws changed. We need our border laws changed. We need Republicans to do it because the Democrats aren't going to. A quote from our president. This is one instance of many. We have tremendous crime trying to come through our borders, he noted. Trump closed his video tweet by saying to the family of Molly Tibbetts, all I can say is, God bless you. God bless you. But this does clearly show, folks, that our immigration laws are a disgrace. They're terrible. They're some of the worst in the world. Trump noted this in a rally up in Charleston, West Virginia, where he said we're trying to get the wall built, and we will get it up. He noted that this tragedy out in Iowa should never have happened. Illegals in our country, well, they've had a huge impact, but the laws are so bad, and he said our laws are really a disgrace. And they are. Truly they are. Christine Bahina Rivera, Mexican immigrant, 24 years old. Charged with killing the young lady. He was found by ICE, you know. ICE, they're the group that's abused by the Democrats, the left. And without them, how many more could be killed? When can the wall get built? Completely built. Trump noticed he'd like to build it even faster, but he said dealing with the Democrats is pretty tough. Well, I'd add that some of those rhino Republicans aren't helping either. Our immigration laws are really bad. Meanwhile, Democrats are clinging to their open border agenda. even as American citizens are being butchered by illegal aliens. From Natural News, the Democrat Party doesn't care what happens to you, your family, or your children if any of you get in the way of their political objective and attempt to retake power. If you do, well, then you're just casualties of the movement. That's the only message you can glean from a top Democrat who's responded with criminal indifference to the news that an illegal alien allegedly confessed to murdering that 20-year-old University of Iowa student. He said he then blacked out. Convenient, isn't it? Then he dumped her body in a cornfield 3 miles from where he'd been working illegally for years. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Warren, a much talked about potential candidate for president in 2020, well, she demonstrated that political objections for her far out left party, well, that takes precedent over having a soul and anything critical of anyone in our country illegal. When asked about the Tibbetts murder, she appallingly said that the country should be focusing on real problems. What real problems is she talking about? The separation of illegal alien adults from their children. More important to her than a university student being butchered. Another real problem is the Democrat-run sanctuary cities that serve as magnets for every kind of illegal that wants to come around. From those who do simply want to find gainful employment to the MS-13 gangbangers who beat victims to death and behead them. Yet another real problem is the government inability to create a better system of vetting and tracking people who are in our country illegally. Sometimes they come in legally and then they choose to stay illegally when their visas run out. We don't do a very good job of prosecuting employers who hire illegals, in large part because Democrats don't want that. And really, neither do the rhinos. You know, they get most of their campaign cash from open border corporate donors. And finally, the biggest real problem related to our border security and immigration issues are left-wing hack apologist politicians like Elizabeth Warren and racial bigots like Christina Greer, who couldn't care less about victims of illegal migrant crimes like Molly Tibbetts. Because, you know, she was white. She was from Iowa. Sad state of affairs we've got in America. But as I said at the beginning, it's not just in America. It's all over. Let's take a look over in Europe. This could be our future here. You know, our members of our Supreme Court think whatever Europe does ought to be automatically adapted by us legally. That beautiful country of Sweden is burning, folks. Migrant gangs have unleashed a coordinated firebomb rampage across their multiple cities. I've been there. It's a beautiful country, peaceful country. It was when I was there. Many Swedes were horrified in early 2017 when President Trump linked immigration to rising crime in Sweden. But you know what? A whole bunch of them are now agreeing with President Trump. Amid soaring crime rates, gang violence, complaints about education, and pregnant mothers even being turned away from their local maternity wards due to a lack of capacity, resentment in Sweden has built over the influx, listen to this, folks, more than 600,000 immigrants over the past 5 years. They're just a small country. Well, recently they've had one of the worst nights of violence in recent history. Police report multiple gangs of mass use rampaging across 3 major Swedish cities, setting fire to cars. It seemed like a coordinated action. They estimated 15 cars in one place had been torched. Youth throwing Molotov cocktails are reported to set fires in many of the vehicles. As the Daily Mail reports, police said they were dealing with multiple fires as dramatic footage showed youth targeting vehicles in shopping centers and hospital parking lots in one city. You know, in Sweden, there are even areas where even now the police don't go. No police areas in peaceful Sweden. It's no surprise, judging by the latest polls, that the people are rising against them. That they're rising against the political parties that have allowed this to happen in Sweden. Reuters reports dozens of people have been killed in the past 2 years in attacks in the capital of Stockholm and other big cities. This mostly from gangs. Most of them come from the rundown suburbs that are dominated now by immigrants. What a shame. What a beautiful country. What beautiful people. Actually, they're pretty much pacifists. But boy, they're sure getting taken advantage of now. And the biggest problem in Europe is undoubtedly Germany's Angela Merkel. Boy, she's terrible. She has a complete open-door policy. No borders. No more borders. This happened back in April, but it was only reported in the German media just recently. And it has not been reported in the English language media. They didn't find it newsworthy that a Muslim migrant beheaded his 1-year-old daughter on a Hamburg, Germany train platform. But the sheer horror of this incident has been compounded now by Merkel's government, which has reportedly banned further reporting on the incident. Oh, can't even talk about it. Oh. You see, they want to keep as many Germans as possible ignorant and complacent regarding just how devastating the Muslim migrant influx into Germany really is. According to Eyewitness, one report said the 33-year-old suspect beheaded his 1-year-old daughter in front of a horrified crowd of commuters at a train station. That was on Thursday, April 12th. And then he stabbed his German girlfriend, the mother of the child. But they didn't even report it. And none of the English papers were allowed to carry it. The Merkel government didn't even open an investigation of the recent honor killing or of Muslim migrant crime. It did not commission a study of Islamic theology and culture and the effects they're having of importing a large number of people from a culture of violence right into their homeland. Angela Merkel's pro-migrant government banned German media outlets from reporting on the violence. An example, Germany's largest newspaper, Bild, reported on the death of the mother of 4 without mentioning the details regarding the barbaric murder of her own child. Why the gag order? Well, clearly, the Merkel government, facing a strong challenge from the Alliance for Germany, which opposes its suicidal policies regarding the mass Muslim migrant influx, wants to tamp down dissent. The fewer Germans that know just how devastating this influx has been, the better off. Sure is, folks. Remember the frog in the hot water? How's this happened? How did it come about that the German government has to resort to silencing the press in order to prevent the full magnitude of its failure from being known? At this point, there are only 2 choices. Either Angela Merkel is a socialist internationalist who's hell-bent on destroying the very concept of the nation-state, as well as that of the ethnicity itself, by flooding her nation and the rest of Europe with Muslim migrants, many of whom are violent and some of whom are jihadist, or she's just terribly stupid. Stupid to the point of requiring institutionalization, and really believes all the fluff and nonsense about diversity and multiculturalism that the international left has provided us with for so many years. Either way, folks, the result is a disaster for Germany, Europe, and the world as a whole. If the only way Merkel can stay in power now is to keep the German people ignorant of the actual effect of the policies she has so fervently pursued, and that ignorance is enforced by a media blackout, she's risking bringing Germany's short life as a free society to an end. It could lead to bringing back the authoritarianism so favored by some of her predecessors, such as Adolf Hitler. If Germany ceases to exist as a free society, and Britain, which is also teetering on the brink, follows suit, the effect is going to be catastrophic for other free nations around the world. Merkel is flirting with doing nothing less than plunging the world into a new dark age. If she had even a whiff of regard for the German people she has sworn to protect and defend, she'd acknowledge that her migrant program has been an appalling mistake, and she would resign. But folks, that's not going to happen. Instead, what lies ahead for Germany is more incidents of violence, along with increased civil strife, more jihad terror attacks, more bloodshed, more social instability, and worse. Future generations of freed Germans may well curse the name of Angela Merkel, but if she gets their way, there won't be any free Germans to protest. Think about it, folks. Oh, and by the way, kind of fits in, the United Kingdom, Britain, rejects Christian refugees recommended by the United Nations. You know why? They'll only admit Muslims among the 1,112 Syrians that were admitted between January and March of this year, 2018. Clearly, the Britain that Theresa May wants is one that has a significant Muslim presence. And that is what Britain has and will bequeath to her successor. Among the Muslim migrants, there will also almost certainly be an unknown number of jihadists, as well as a significant number of people who believe Sharia law ought to be the sole or primary law of the land. That's Britain's future. You know, right now they've already got a Muslim as mayor of London. Oh yeah, voted in. Who do you think put him there? If any free people live in that unhappy land in future generations, they're going to curse the name of Theresa May. But that, again, is a big if. No Christians allowed in the United Kingdom's Syria refugee intake. Not a single Christian was among the 1,112 Syrian refugees resettled to the UK in the first 3 months of this year. That is a report from their own Home Office. It agreed only to settle Muslims and rejected the 4 Christians recommended by the UN High Commission for Refugees, despite past U.S. declarations that ISIS was committing genocide against them. And let's take a look over in the Netherlands. A leading Muslim politician tells the Dutch people, quote, "If you don't like a changing Netherlands, you should get lost from their own country. This is the foreigners coming in, telling them if they don't like it now, leave your own country." That's right. A guy named Kuzu is in the Netherlands to stay, and he knows who the masters of the country will soon be, and if the Dutch don't like it, they can leave. Well, folks, watch for more Muslim leaders in Europe to say this is in the near future. Muslim party leader in the Netherlands tells the Dutch people to leave the country if they don't like diversity. Kuzu, the political leader of the DENK party in the Netherlands, has caused some serious controversy. It's finally being reported. If they don't like a changing Netherlands in which people with different cultures live, they should get lost. He said this in an interview in Netherlands. His DENK party is a controversial party which is rapidly growing in Dutch urban areas. It especially performs well in areas with high Muslim populations, for example, in Western Amsterdam. In the latest Dutch national election in March 2017, DENK won 3 seats, grabbing almost 200,000 votes. But a year later, in the municipal election, the party was by far the largest in Amsterdam and swept away some traditional leftist parties. DENK was founded only in February of 2015 by 2 former Turkish Labour Party members. During the latest meeting with their party, DVPD leader said during the argument, quote, "May Allah punish you." That in the Netherlands. Now, there are some anti-immigrants. There are protesters. There are leaders in some country that are trying to keep the migrants out. And they're making it difficult in a lot of areas. On both sides of the Atlantic, migrants flooding across borders by the hundreds each day have met a hostile reception, and governments unable to agree on how to cope with the arrival. In Europe, far-right parties have joined the governments in Italy and Austria, and they've made gains at keeping the migrants away. Even the most basic decision of which port would accept a ship filled with migrants has been a problem. But we have seen an uprising on the right, as we have in our country, by electing Donald Trump. Recently, you saw probably in the news another rescue boat loaded with migrants. They struggled to find a safe harbor in the Mediterranean, while in Austria, police cadets were having a show by their police cadets showing how to keep desperate refugees rattled in a chain-link fence demanding to be let in. We have a migratory crisis in the past, but that's not what we're going through now. We're living now through a European political crisis. This is a quote from French President Macron. He said this recently meeting with Pope Francis at the Vatican. The European crisis mirrors the one in the United States, where a broad-ranging Republican immigration bill failed. Yeah, it failed. Maybe it'll pass one day. What has to happen? How many more Mollies have to be murdered? With legislation in disarray and global uproar over the separation of more than 23 migrant children from their parents, the Trump administration abruptly reversed a key element in its zero-tolerance immigration policy. They halted the practice of separating immigrant families caught illegally crossing the border, but leaving more than 2,000 separated children in limbo in government-contracted shelters. A standoff in Europe involving multiple governments, all running their own immigration policies, but they have open borders amongst them. Again, folks, I point out what's happening in Europe because it so often comes to the United States, and so many liberals say that we ought to follow the advancement of the more cultured elite coming to the forefront in Europe. But look at what's happening. Well, there was a great idea introduced a few weeks ago by Congressman Biggs. Did you see it? He said for every illegal that comes in, we ought to cut foreign aid from the country they're coming from and use that money to build the wall. Hey, great for Andy Biggs. Here's what he said in his bill. Countries whose citizens repeatedly enter the United States illegally will eventually pay for a wall at the southern border through steep cuts in their foreign aid packages. That from Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona. He said it in a bill that he recently presented. The bill would raise anywhere between $2 billion and $3 billion a year to pay for the wall, he noted. He said under his bill, the fund and complete the Border Wall Act, countries would get hit with costs of $2,000 in foreign aid for each person who comes into the United States illegally, with the money going to build the wall. In Mexico, they receive $25 to $30 billion this year, alone in remittance payments right out of our economy, going back to Mexico, and we don't even impose any fee on that. Biggs is also calling for the border wall to be built by December of 19, which he admitted is very aggressive, but he said that's what Donald Trump has called for. He said, I don't know whether it can happen or not, but we got to put a date up there because right now nothing's really getting done. Biggs said it's critical to get the bill through the House by the midterm elections, as that sends a very strong signal to the Republican base and independents who voted for Republicans, and that helps keep the party in control in the House and in the Senate. Just an idea, folks. But boy, it sounds like a good one to this old country boy.